In May 1915, an explosion ripped through the air and sent debris flying for miles around. And it happened just over there in the Medway Estuary. What was the cause? World War I? Was it a German bomb? Was it sabotage? It was none of those things. It was a ship. A British Navy ship, HMS Princess Irene, exploded in an instant, killing almost everybody on board. But it turned out it wasn't just those who were on board who were in danger. We'll find out what happened, why it happened, and ultimately remember the victims of this horrible tragedy near the start of the First World War. Am I miles away from where I need to be? Of course. Could I have parked closer? Couldn't be bothered to find out. If I can make it more difficult by walking a very long way to get there, you know I'm going to do it. Are we going to find the buoy that marks the location of this wreck? Of course we are. I know what I'm looking for. Just for reference, it is somewhere over there. This is the sad story of what was supposed to be a luxury liner that was turned into a warship and essentially became a powder keg ready to blow at any moment. She was originally built in 1914 for the Canadian Pacific Railway. The Princess Irene was originally meant to be doing, glamorous passenger runs. So think cocktails, fancy dresses, people cruising along the coastline in Canada. But then a little thing happened called World War I, and the British Navy went, oh, that nice new ship you built, yeah, we could use that. And they took it and turned it into a mine-laying ship. So they didn't retrofit it into a battleship, they turned it into a mine layer. So essentially a ship that's sole purpose was to be packed to bursting with mines, and then that ship would then go out to various strategic locations, in this case, around the British Isles, and drop hundreds of those mines. So hey, what could possibly go wrong? And her first mine-laying operation was in April 1915 when she laid 280 mines in the English Channel. And then that was swiftly followed by her second operation where she laid about 300 and something, I can't remember exactly, 300 odd mines northwest of Heligoland. And after the successful completion of that operation, she came back to Sheerness. Now the wreck itself is somewhere called Salt Pan Reach, which is where it was moored when the explosion took place. And there is still a buoy marking its location, so hopefully we can see it. And to get there, I'm going to have to follow this English coastal path, and hopefully it'll take me to those huge factories over there, which are right next to Salt Pan Reach. And then hopefully from there we'll be able to get the drone over and actually spot this buoy. Where I'm walking right now, this path, is the English coastal path, so I'm allowed to be here. But what's hilarious about this place is that I'm on the English coastal path right here, this kind of raised ridge. Next to me is this kind of marina with the boats, and then the Medway Estuary in the background. Literally right next to me here is a runway. And then next to that are train tracks. Now, I don't think it's not like National Rail or something. I think they just use it to move stuff from the factories and the plants over there to wherever. I like the fact that, 4 different forms of transport are all just squidged into this one little strip of land here. On the 25th of May, she was moved from moorings near Sheerness dockyard to Salt Pan Reach. And Salt Pan Reach is about there. So you can see I've still got some way to walk. And after she was anchored in Salt Pan Reach, they started to prep her for her third mission, which was again a mine-laying operation. So she was having hundreds of mines brought aboard and stowed in racks, ready to be deployed when she was going to head out in a few days' time. On the morning of the 27th of May 1915, it was all going on. There was a complete hive of activity around the Princess Irene as hundreds of men were prepping the ship with hundreds of mines. And it was about 7 a.m. in the morning when a huge party of dock workers from Sheerness arrived to help out with the effort. They were also helped out by a group of almost 90 workers from Chatham dockyards. And all of those men were there to help prime the mines and get them ready to be deployed when the Irene headed back out. At just after 9, around 9:15 a.m, a few people left the Princess Irene.
And at 10 minutes past 11, 5 more men left the ship.
A few people who would turn out to be some of the luckiest men alive.
Roughly 4 minutes later, at 11:15 a.m, it happened. A huge explosion completely engulfed the ship. And it's such a huge explosion that an eyewitness actually compared it to the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. And where the ship had been only moments earlier, there was nothing but smoke and flame. And this was an incredibly high column of smoke. And it wasn't just smoke and flame in the air, it was debris. Another witness actually described how it didn't just look like the ship had exploded, but it looked like it had exploded into 10,000 fragments. And quite disturbingly, multiple eyewitnesses actually described seeing the forms of men flying through the air amongst all that smoke and debris. And those on land were not safe from the carnage.
3 miles away in Sheerness, remember where the Irene had been docked a couple of days previously, buildings shook with the force of the explosion and debris fell everywhere. Where I'm standing right now in the Isle of Grain with the oil refinery behind me, 4 of the Navy's oil storage tanks were ruptured and the pumping station connected, along with several sections of pipeline, were damaged by debris from the ship falling on them.
People going about their day one moment were dodging debris the next. And tragically, in Grain Village, a 9-year-old girl called Ida Barden was playing in her uncle's garden when she was struck by a huge piece of metal and killed. Later, a 47-year-old farm labourer called George Bradley was found dead in a field, and it was assumed that he had dropped dead from the shock of the explosion. Workers on board other ships in the area were injured by flying debris, and a huge piece of steel plate that had been flung away from the ship killed a crewman on another ship that was about half a mile away. Another boat was struck by a huge section of the Irene's boiler falling onto its deck, which actually made a crane topple, injuring 2 people. When the dust settled, it was found that the explosion had killed more than 380 men on board the Irene. Those 3 men that had left the ship 4 minutes before the explosion did not know how lucky they were. And the dead included every single one of the Sheerness and Chatham dockyard workers, except one. A man called Stoker David Wills was possibly the luckiest man that day. He just happened to be going for an early lunch, and he was in the forward galley at the time of the explosion. We're not 100% sure how he survived, but in the immediate aftermath, he was spotted in the water, surrounded by oil and wreckage. Unfortunately, a nearby tug was able to come in and the crew were able to pull him from the water. He didn't escape completely unscathed though. He had terrible burns to his face, arms and hands. But eventually, after a long rehabilitation, he was actually passed as fit to resume service with the Royal Navy, and actually continued to work for another 12 years. And nicely, he actually named one of his daughters Irene after the ill-fated ship. I mean, you'd think maybe he wouldn't want to be reminded every day of what he'd gone through, but I suppose he survived, so maybe it was a nice reminder. Now, this would have brought back horrible memories for the people in the local area who only 6 months previously had obviously been witness to the huge explosion and terrible death toll of the Bulwark. And here it was happening again, except this time they weren't safe on land either.
As you can now picture, there was debris everywhere for miles around. Even some as far away as Detling, which is about 11 miles from where I'm standing right now. And because there was such a widespread field of debris from this explosion, the police actually asked locals, members of the public, farmers, whoever they could get, to search for debris from the ship, but also for human remains.
And amongst the debris that had been flown so far afield, it was reported that human body parts, and in some cases heads, were being found in the local area.
Disturbing all kinds of wildlife down here. I'm not sure too many people walk this way. I gotta say, it's very peaceful here. Just me and the birds and the endless bugs desperately trying to get into my eyes, and the footpath that has now deteriorated into just a series of never-ending ankle-breaking gullies. It's lovely. No, it is nice. Every time I take off with this thing, there's a non-zero chance that I never see it again. So goodbye, little drone. If this is the last time I see you, you've served me well. It's covered in shit. Wish me luck. I mean, there's every chance this just gets taken out by a bird. Yeah, there are birds coming for me. Might even be that one over there, but I'm actually starting to lose signal, which I don't like. Ooh. They're coming for me. Okay, we're officially erring on the side of caution here. Those birds are definitely trying to dive bomb me. Let's just hope we make it back, eh? I have to admit, I am a coward when it comes to flying drones. I've come too close to losing too many expensive drones that if I even get a hint of trouble, I'm out. That bird was definitely coming for me.
Well, sorry I'm a coward who got ruffled by some birds, but here's a picture of the boy, and so hopefully that will suffice.
So the Royal Navy obviously launched an investigation afterwards, and it was led by Lord Mersey, the same guy who was responsible for looking into the Titanic and Lusitania. And after ruling out sabotage, enemy attack, they came to the realization that it was probably a faulty pistol being attached to a mine that set it off and then caused a chain reaction through the rest of the hundreds of mines that would have been on board the ship at that time. And they actually did tests after the fact with similar mines and found out there's a high likelihood that it was a faulty pistol. Add to that the fact that a lot of the men from the dockyards, from wherever else, were brought in to help with the efforts of loading in the mines. Obviously this is early in the war, so there was a lot of pressure on them to get these things out there quick. And in that haste, it would seem like men without training, men who weren't suitable for the job, and men who were being rushed. Add to that, faulty pistols, faulty equipment. It was almost inevitable that something like this was going to happen.
Under the lamentable circumstances, the court consider it as impossible to attribute blame, but it is of the opinion that no plea of haste should ever allow these pistols being fitted by anything other than fully qualified men, and further, that a slight mechanical device should be fitted to the pistols to ensure that the pistol could not fire until it is properly placed with other safety devices in the mine. And again, after the investigation, the war continued, and the tragedy of the Princess Irene was again lost in the carnage of World War I. Ultimately, no one was found specifically to blame, and no one took responsibility. It was just put down as another tragic accident during a time of war. And just like the Bulwark, it's another reminder that not all war casualties are caused by the enemy, whether it's poor training, incompetence, or just rushing to get a job done. When you're working with the kind of explosives they were working with, all it takes is one small mistake, one mechanical error, something like that. Something so small and otherwise inconsequential, but in this situation causes the deaths of hundreds of men and ultimately in this case, one child. And what remains of the Princess Irene still sits there today. Some of the wreckage was moved in the 1960s, after I think it was a tug actually bumped into part of it, but the rest of it still sits there. And it seems like, unless the Port Authority eventually, and there's been talk about this, unless they decide they want to open up the estuary a bit more for larger shipping vessels to come through, then the Irene will stay right where she is. Remember, there is still the potential complication of unexploded mines left amongst the wreckage. So hopefully all we have here is a tragic war grave and not a ticking time bomb. I mean, ultimately you could just add it to the list of ticking time bombs that surround the British Isles from the war.
Well, you know what? Despite the threat of bird attack, I think we've come close enough. What being here makes you realise, and it's completely insane, is just the force of this explosion. So using the drone from where I'm currently sat on the coastal path, I worked out that from where I am here to where the ship was moored, it's roughly 2 kilometres, like 1.5 miles. And I would think that seeing a ship explode from here, I'd be fine. So the fact that they were finding debris 11 miles away, it just shows how incredibly powerful this explosion was and how incredibly unlucky the people who were killed and injured on land were. As usual, it's always something to sit here and be able to look at exactly where it happened, almost exactly 110 years ago to the day I'm filming. The lives lost, the people affected. I'm sure you ask the majority of people under 40 around here now, especially further afield, and I doubt anyone remembers this. I think it's important not just to explain what happened to people, but I think it's also important to really take the time to remember the people impacted by it, But these isolated, catastrophic events during war that get lost in the mix and outside of wartime would be huge disasters, but they just get lost, they just get buried. Okay, I am back at Woodlands Cemetery in Gillingham, where we're going to go and find the victims from HMS Princess Irene, who were laid to rest here. So we've reached the naval section of the cemetery. You can see behind me loads and loads of headstones. Lots of people buried here. And there were actually 15 victims of the HMS Irene who were identified and buried here, and 10 who weren't able to be identified. And they are part of the mass grave for the HMS Bulwark and the Irene. Remember, the HMS Bulwark blew up 6 months before the Irene, so they were placed in the same grave. Just in front of me is the memorial to the Bulwark and the Irene, and we're going to see if we can find the identified victims of the Irene somewhere near here. I'd imagine they'd be near the same memorial. Well, here we go. We found our first victims of the Princess Irene. This chap is Alexander William Arthur Daisley. He was a signalman on the Princess Irene, aged 28. Frederick James Timms, another ordinary signalman from the Princess Irene. He was only 18. Now remember, there were only supposed to be about 15 men here, the only ones who could be identified, so let's have a count. What's interesting in a horribly morbid kind of way is walking around here and noticing that even though the Princess Irene was technically a bigger explosion than the Bulwark, it's just the number of dead from the Bulwark. Every other grave is a victim of the Bulwark. Well, I found 12. I think that's probably pretty good going. Okay, you can make that 15. I just found the last 3. But as always, walking around, it's just a reminder that we're here looking into this one accident, this one disaster which cost the lives of hundreds of people. And as you're walking around, there are just so many other graves. The Princess Irene victims here are dwarfed by the victims of so many other ships. Bulwark, Pembroke, Hood. There are so many graves here. It's just war is hell and a pointless waste of time and human life. Well, hey, that was another uplifting look into another pointless tragedy from the First World War, but still a fascinating story, and one that I think it's important to put out there and document as much as possible so more people remember these kinds of things, because as everyone knows, we shouldn't forget. So if you enjoyed this video, thanks for watching. There's plenty more like this on my channel and more to come. Subscribe, like, all the rest of that stuff, and I'll see you in the next one.